Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another FirstMedCommsJob webinar. I'm delighted today to be joined by Julia Walton, a specialist consultant from Media Contacts. Just to sort of put a bit of context on this, for those of you who don't know me, I run MedCommsNetworking.com, which is a whole array of activity for people working in and around MedComms, by which I mean medical communications, education, publishing and so on. And part of that is reaching out and telling people in academia and elsewhere about MedComms from the point of view of encouraging people to come and look at it as a career opportunity. And there are some great career opportunities for writers, for account managers and so on. So at FirstMedCommsJob.com, we run an array of services for people who want to know more about MedComms. It includes articles, careers, guides, videos and so on, and a number of meetings. But on the meetings front, and they are very good meetings, we run open meetings, Oxford, Manchester, London, and so on. If you can get there, do get there, because you meet lots of people who can be very helpful. But not everyone can get to the meetings. So what I'm trying to do now is extend the reach by using this Zoom platform, running virtual meetings, and bringing various people in from the agency side and the business to talk about the business and provide more insights and tips. As I say, today we've got Julia with us, who's coming in from a specialist recruiters point of view. So we're going to have a short presentation, and then we're going to have a Q&A session, which I hope will be a bit of fun for everybody. We've got a good group of people online at the moment, and hopefully they'll be able to provide us with some questions that we can talk around. So if everyone is happy, I'm going to ask Julia to introduce herself and kick off with her slide presentation. Thanks. Over to you, Julia.
Hello, I'm Julia Walton from Media Contacts, which is a specialist recruitment agency, and I've been recruiting for the healthcare communications sector, which includes MedComms agencies, healthcare PR and advertising for 13 years now. So today I'm going to talk to you about your CV, and first of all, why it's so important. Years ago, most job applications started off with a phone call. These days, it's much more likely to be an email with your CV attached. And your CV is likely to be one of dozens that the hiring manager receives. So it's really important that it stands out, because this is the difference between whether you get an interview or not. So you need to be able to create a convincing argument, to make yourself a brand. Think of yourself as a commodity that you're selling to get an interview. Especially if you want to work in a communications agency, clearly it's self-evident why your CV is so important and that it's the most perfect piece of writing that you can put together. Before you even begin, your CV needs to be tailored towards medical communications, but that can only work if you've done your research thoroughly. So you need to know exactly what a MedComms agency does, exactly what the MedComms agency you want to apply to does, because they're all different, that you understand what the job involves, and therefore you're able to say why that's what you want to do, and this message needs to come across throughout your CV. So in order to research the industry, you can attend events such as the ones that Peter Llewellyn runs. You can read read relevant trade press such as Pharma Times and Pharmaceutical Marketing Europe. Look at the websites of the agencies that you're interested in, and generally Google MedComms and look at pharmaceutical websites as well, and look at what they're doing, so you really thoroughly understand the industry. You also should have some sort of an idea of what's happening in healthcare generally. So look at the broader scope, what's going on with the different pharmaceutical companies, what's happening with the NHS, for example. Once you've done all that, and it comes to putting your CV together, you should start with a personal statement. Now, you can call this what you like. It could be summary, it could be objective, it could just be an opening paragraph without a title. But you need to summarise who you are, what you want to do, and why you want to do it. So this needs to be more than I'm a science graduate who wants to use my communication skills in an environment that's not the lab. It needs to say that I want to work in a medical communications agency because I have compelling and convincing arguments for why this is what you want to do. Bear in mind that one of the key things an employer will look for is that you get the industry, you really understand what they do, and that you're genuinely enthusiastic. Further down the CV, you need to state your work experience, clearly emphasising the elements that are relevant. So if you're applying to be a medical writer, focus on the materials that you've written. So list your employers. Do put the months that you worked there as well as the year. For example, if you put 2015 to 2016, that might be 24 months, or it might be 2 weeks, depending when you started and when you ended. Include your education as well, but you don't need to go into every module that you studied. The fact that you've got a PhD and the dates that you did it and the result that you got is enough. Galling as it might be when you've spent all those years studying, a potential employer is more interested in the fact that you've done a PhD than the exact subject matter. You can talk about that at interview, but for the purposes of securing an interview, they just want to know what you've done. Whether or not you include hobbies and interests is down to personal taste, but I would advise it. It's nice to show an all-rounded personality. It can give an interviewer a potential hook to begin a conversation with. And you can also include things that are relevant. For example, if you have a very technical, scientific background, it's nice to show a creative hobby. If you're, I don't know, you might want to show that you are a good team player by demonstrating your team sports. Or just the fact that you have interests over and above purely studying that show that you're a well-rounded person. Keep the formatting simple, clean and clear. Make it easy and accessible to read. And avoid photographs. At worst, it looks as though you're depending on what you look like to get a job. At best, you'll give the person reading it a good laugh. So no photos. And keep it all succinct and focused. When you've finished all of this, read it aloud, reread it again, go away, go to sleep, come back the next day, read it in the cold light of day, and then run it by some people that you trust. When you've done all of that, if you've got time, leave it 24, 48 hours and do it again. If you know a recruiter that you can speak to, ask their advice, because they will look at a CV in a different way than a friend might. They will look at it more from the point of view, well, commercial point of view of what's going to secure you the job. And when you've done all of that, read it again. It needs to be perfect. Once you've done all that, then you're ready to start applying. Good luck. And if anyone would like me to have a look at their CV personally, I'm more than happy to do that. You can email it to me or ring me.
Excellent. Thanks, Julia. So if we lose that slideshow.
Oops.
Just stop sharing. That's it.
Yes.
Okay, so that was just a simple little introduction, but it gives us a bit of a scene setter. To state the obvious, guys, those of you out there listening to this, what we want are a few questions coming in. So you've shown the boxes work with your hellos and highs, but send some comments and questions in, and we'll use Julia's expertise for the next 20 minutes or so. Julia, can I just kick off with a couple of questions, basic questions? I was talking to a couple of people yesterday about a couple of points, which might just give us a starting point. One person emailed me yesterday. I think what they were basically saying was that they're looking for a job in MedComms, but reading between the lines, what they're looking to do is work remotely. To be honest, I don't know where that person was based, but that I think was the question, was basically how easy is it to get some work in MedComms, an entry-level job in MedComms, but working remotely. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yes, certainly. It's very difficult to get an entry-level job and work remotely. In fact, I've never heard of it happening. The reason being that you need to be part of a team. They'll need to train you. You need to understand agency processes. And I think to be trained and to learn both through formal training and on-the-job training and via osmosis from your colleagues, you really do need to be in the office. Once you've got several years' experience, then yes, working remotely is totally possible. But to begin with, you really do need to be office-based.
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely agree with that. I'm not sure we can ever say never about anything, but it'd be very, very difficult working remotely. Just as a point on that, particularly for those of you in the UK, and I'm assuming everyone's here from the UK, on the FirstMedComm's website, you'll find a list of the agencies, but I've also mapped all mapped the office locations. It's not perfect, but it's quite comprehensive. So if you are looking in for particular locations, that should give you a good steer as to who is based around you. And I'm afraid there are some gaps in the country. But that's absolutely, Julia, what I would say to people. They need to base it, and for very good reasons. I mean, not just because agencies want it, but as an individual working in the agency and working with the team, it's very, very good experience. So hopefully that covers off that one. The other question, which I'll just cover off quickly, now the questions are coming in, but just another question that came in yesterday from somebody who might well be on the call at the moment, I'm not sure. She was basically, I suppose, coming from the point of view of, I've got a reasonable amount of experience. I think she's working in the industry at the moment. How easy is it to get, as a new person coming in, as a writer? Would you have to start as an entry level, or can you come in more higher up? Basically, I think she's coming across the problem that maybe she's applying for jobs as a writer, even a senior writer, and being told, you haven't got the experience. So there's that sort of conflict. If you haven't got the experience, you can't get there. What would you say about that situation in terms of where they can start if they've got a bit more experience?
They will still need to start as an entry-level writer, albeit that somebody with all that experience will move up much more quickly. But there is nothing that compares to the writing that somebody will do in an agency. And again, it's understanding agency processes. It's working as a part of a team servicing the client. There really isn't an equivalent. I see this time and time again, because somebody might have written to a very, very high level in another area. It's just not the same as what you do in an agency. So it's universally the case. Yes, they do need to.
And again, I concur completely with that, and that was what I told her on the phone. So we're agreeing with each other. Again, you never know, and part of the point of part of my message is meet as many people as you can, because if you meet people, it's remarkable how, somebody meets you and goes, it's just the perfect person for the agency, and they will adapt around you a little bit. But in essence, they expect you to start at the beginning and move on up. So we're actually starting to get quite a few questions. So let's just pick, Julia, a couple of these questions. Let's take some simple ones. Nicola has come in. Should your name at the top of the CV be followed by PhD, or just list that in education?
It doesn't really matter as long as it shows. It's there's no right and wrong, no protocol. Whichever you're more comfortable with.
As a general point, it's worth maybe saying that this is a business that embraces PhDs and postdocs, but you don't have to have a PhD and postdoc to get in. If anything, the pendulum has swung slightly back. Whereas a few years ago, it seemed to be getting a bit obsessive with, we want PhD postdoc. Nowadays, it's a bit more open. But the PhD postdoc is good experience, particularly in terms of transferable skills. Again, that's what they're looking for. And I think there are people in the business who would probably say, yeah, no, put the PhD up front, be proud of it, sort of thing. Yeah. But those of you without the PhD postdoc, don't think that your opportunities to get into medical writing are shut. They're certainly not. Deborah, do you have advice for people looking to move from pharmaceutical research into MedComms? Any particular roles that are more accessible?
That's definitely a good background to have, but it will come down to personal preference and whether you particularly enjoy writing, want to be a writer, whether you enjoy the project management, whether you see yourself as an account handler and working in client services. I wouldn't say that coming from pharmaceutical research particularly means one path or the other. It's very much about you as a person and the aspects of the job that you enjoy.
Again, just to cover off maybe a slightly bigger context there, people typically think in terms of medical writing or account management as the two roles within MedComms. For what it's worth, there happen to be two careers guides on FirstMedCommsJob, medical writing and account management. But it's not quite as simple and straightforward as that. You'll find a lot of writing jobs involve account management and client services. You'll find account management can mean lots of different things in different agencies. Tends to mean more the client service side, but it can be very much project management, or it can be more of a sales role. But there are other roles as well. I mean, editing being an obvious one, editing, proofreading. Different agencies are set up in slightly different ways with different types of teams, event management and so on. So I think as a general point, you need to sort of research the business and understand those sorts of different roles. One point which we usually make at these sorts of meetings is if you can get in, and that's usually the hard bit, to be honest, they set the bar quite high. But once you get in, it's relatively easy to move around. Most agencies will go, you came in as an account manager, but you're looking like you're doing really well at the writing side, so go that way. Again, would you agree with all of that, Julia?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Another couple of questions are coming in on both sides now. From Emily, for PhD entry-level medical writing, is proofreading and editing experience valuable? Yes, I guess, Julia?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, because it will help with attention to detail and show a proven track record of doing that.
And again, what they're looking for, one of the things I often have this sort of conversation with people, you know, they are, and we've sort of already touched on this a little bit, entry-level positions, if they're recruiting for entry-level positions, they sort of assume you're not a medical writer, say, okay? They're going to train you. That's the whole point. And Julia touched on the fact you can have lots of writing experience in a different area, but they still want to train you in medical writing. What they're looking for is aptitude and ability and so on. Anything that you've got that you can put on the CV that shows interest in and aptitude and ability at the obvious sort of skills. You know, if you're writing, you might have written about, I don't know, rock climbing or something, but if it's well written and so on, it's a good example of what you do. That shows an ability to communicate and ability to write. Things like proofreading, editing, often quite easy to pick up that sort of experience through societies, journals, and with your colleagues and so on. It shows an interest in and should show, I mean, if you do it well, it shows you can do it well. And these businesses are looking for attention to detail. That's one of the key messages to whatever you do. Attention to detail is important. Any proofreading, editing type experience is all good stuff. So hopefully that answers that question, Emily. That was quite straightforward, even if you don't want to be a proofreader editor. But bear in mind those roles are available in the companies as well. Yeah? Okay, flicking over here. Okay, Tanya. Writing tests are an important part of the recruitment process for medical writing jobs. Do MedComms companies use specific software to analyse the writing, or do they just use the statistics in Word? Do you know what the answer to that is, Julie?
I don't know, actually. No, I'm afraid you've stumped me there. I think they generally get experienced, you know, they're experienced writers to look at them. I'm not aware of any software.
I think you'd probably be surprised how much, or some of you might be a bit surprised. That's an interesting question. I've not come up before. I think you would probably be surprised how little they rely on things like software and how much they rely on the experience. So they get an experienced person to assess the writing test. They know what they're looking for. They've got templates and scoring systems. They understand what they're looking for. But it does raise an interesting question about how many, if any, are going in that direction. And certainly there would be a place for that, if not now in the future, getting some sort of software package to be looking at that sort of thing. One thing that certainly has started creeping in, I'm not sure how much at an agency level, but you know, plagiarism software and things like that is relatively straightforward now. So certainly those sorts of issues are coming up. But that's just an interesting question, Tanya. Thank you. I'm gonna pick that up specifically with some of the agencies if I can in January and see them in Oxford. Okay, here's another question. Well, let's stick with the CVs for a moment. So Poppy's asking, what differences should there be for a CV for applying for a medical writer job and comparing to a role more on the account management side, Julie?
Okay, so for a medical writing job, you need to show a passion and an interest in writing. In my experience, writers are almost born rather than made, and people that want to be writers read a lot. They write at every opportunity. You might write outside of work, you might be blogging, but they will have written throughout their life so far, and they need to show and emphasize that. Whereas with account handling, looking at more having been public facing, dealing with difficult situations, showing that you've been in a fairly robust environment. Yes, you know, you might have been running some sort of society at university or involved in something, if not in a work capacity, maybe some voluntary work, but account handlers will be tend to be a bit more outgoing. And you have proven experience of dealing with people in different situations.
it's important that people understand that that isn't an absolute line. Yeah, and I think
No.
you sort of touched on this. I mean, when I started in MedComms, it was much more, you know, you were a writer in the writing department or an editor in the editing department. You were an account manager in the account management department. These days, it's much more fluid than that. And particularly the writers, it's very rare now that writers aren't having only some client contact and some account management type responsibilities. And in some agencies, they very much, it's writers, you know, who deal with the clients and deal with the accounts and so on. It's a good question to understand when you're looking at an agency, how they do divvy those roles up, and where if the lines are there. So it's looking for, so even most agencies now, it's going to be a mixture, and they'll be looking for people with skills that lend themselves more to one or other, but it's not an absolute. Again, you're agreeing with that, Julia, yeah?
Yes, completely. You know, hybrid roles are much more common.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm flicking through these questions that are coming. I'm flicking through them, so I'm probably losing track, which is probably a bad way of doing it. Let's have a look at this question then. So, okay, what's the best way to research a particular company? What questions to ask Google? Go on, Julia, what questions?
Well, okay, so I would start by looking on the company's website. If you can see anything about their work and their clients, look at their clients' websites. They may well have had some input there. So yes, look at the type of work that they do. Look at the people that work there. Look at their backgrounds. Look at what they do. You could Google the name of the company and see what comes up. Any industry news? Are they part of another group? Have they taken another company over? Have they won some awards? Really see what comes up and run with it from there. When you're looking on LinkedIn at the people that work there, and look at the people who have worked there. What have they gone on to do since? What did they do before? How many of them are? What does it look as though the structure is? It's amazing what you can find over and above what's on the company's website, but it involves some lateral thinking and some digging and seeing where things lead you.
Again, I think it's an important point to make that most of the companies, let's call them companies, the possible employers, their websites will be, by and large, in their opinions, geared more towards the sort of new business development side of it. We can all sit and criticize each other's websites, so we need to be a bit careful with this. But, you know, typically a website is, what can we do for you, the client, and how do we do it? There's increasing numbers of websites, or agencies, should we say, who are setting up either websites specifically, or parts of their website, for people who are looking to join them and work with them. And some of those are very good, and they're putting quite a lot of resource behind it. But when you're looking at a website, I think it's important to think about who they're targeting that website at, and it's more likely to be the client than you, so you can get some useful information about it. But as Julia's saying, think a bit sort of laterally. The point about if you're on LinkedIn, which I think basically you should be, you can look up and find out quite a lot of information about the people there. And you see what they're doing. That's quite useful. And specifically, if you're told who's going to be in your interview, I would strongly suggest that you check out the people that are going to be interviewing you. Apart from anything else, I would make a strong point here that do not underestimate the fact that they're now checking you out. You know, it's useful to have a good LinkedIn profile. I think I would recommend you have a LinkedIn profile. Make sure it's sensible and up to date. They will be looking for those sorts of things. Also, I always say this with a slight smile, but it's a slightly serious point. You know, that blog, you know, that you posted the day after a particularly fun university party a year or two ago. Some of that stuff's still up there, and it's quite easily findable in 30 seconds as the guy is sitting there behind a desk waiting for you to come in. And they're doing a bit of Googling of you, and they can find stuff that works against you, but they can also find stuff that works in your favor. So think about your digital footprint there, and think about the fact they're researching you as much as you're researching them. What I'm trying to do at FirstMedCommsJob is get people to contribute specific information that's of interest, or should be of interest to people that are looking for a job. You'll find quite a lot of insights there from individuals working within companies. And I would give another plug for the open meetings that I run, where you will meet, 40, 50 MedComms guys from a dozen MedComms agencies, and you can talk to them, and you can look them in the eye, and you you can really sort of start to understand what's going on in the business and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. That gives you a huge amount of insight into the business if you can make the meetings. Couple more. Let's just keep going with this. I'm interested in the career in medical communications that need a tier 2 work visa to work in the UK. So are the agencies sponsoring visas? Let's touch on this a little bit, Julia. What's your experience there?
Short answer, no. No, unless you're very senior. Bear in mind that there's a cost involved, it's time consuming, it's increasingly difficult. Agencies are really only sponsoring visas for very senior appointments, usually where they've had to headhunt someone. But bear in mind, to sponsor a visa, they need to be able to prove they couldn't find anyone here who could do the job, which is not easy. If they are going to sponsor visas, and it does happen, it would definitely need to be a direct application. But if you can sort that visa out yourself, it's really worth doing, because it will make all the difference. It's very, very hard at entry level. Just going back to the social media thing, we have got a blog on social media and how to make sure that's all up to date on our website, if that helps.
Yeah, good, yeah. So a similar sort of question, I've just lost it. How easy is it for a non-native speaker to get a job in MedComms in the UK? Do you want to talk to that one for a moment, Julia?
Yes, well, many non-native speakers speak all right, better English than native speakers, so it's not necessarily an issue. There are lots and lots of non-native speakers in the industry, some of the very best. But if your English isn't up to scratch, then it will be a barrier, because attention to detail is critical. One mistake in your work can end up costing an agency thousands upon thousands of pounds if it slips through the net. So it's something to make sure your English is perfect before you start applying.
Yeah, so it's a very English-driven business. Although it's a global business, it's very English language-driven, and the English language ability is absolutely important. As you say, many non-English speakers are very good at the English language, so that's okay. Another way of looking at that is this is a global business, so they actually embrace people with multiple languages because they are dealing with clients, they're dealing with speakers, authors, whatever, all over the world. So language skills are hugely useful. And also, it's worth making the point, although it's driven, this is a business that's driven out of the UK, but it is basically a global business. There are offices all over the world. And MedComms is only a small niche on this communication spectrum, bear in mind that as well. So if you want to get into medical communications, you're outside the UK, you might find there's a community of agencies where you're looking. Maybe they work more at a national level than an international level. So don't, again, see this in the bigger context, yeah? But language skills are useful. English language, though, or writing English is very, very important. Let's try this one. I'm, Gemma, I'm in the final year of my PhD. How far in advance do agencies recruit for entry-level jobs?
Well, not usually more than 3 or 4 months, but it's worth applying early, going to your networking events and meeting people, because if they really, really like you, especially if it's an agency that maybe has an entry-level intake twice a year, get your name put down, have that offer nice and early. So there's no time when it's too early to start, but you're most likely to be looking at a job offer that wouldn't be more than 3 or 4 months ahead.
Yeah, and what, you do hear stories. Only a week or so ago, I had an email from someone who's got a job with an agency. They met at one of these careers events. They're finishing their PhD, but they wanted to go traveling for 6 months, and the agency said, "Yeah, that's fine. It's all sorted." So there is don't underestimate this. If we like you, we can work around you, whatever type aspect of things. This is an agency business. It's people business. So it's probably impossible to answer the question, Gemma, exactly beyond what Julia said, but don't be afraid of approaching these guys, particularly at the meetings, and talking to them. Some of them will, Julia, I think, said, if there's a twice a year type intake, there's a range of situations out there. There are agencies that are now running, regular intakes of new entry level roles. Ashfield being an obvious example with the Allegro program, which is now there's 3 or 4 intakes a year. So it's almost like they just need to keep that machine going. They need to find good people. There are other agencies, might take 1 or 2 entry levels a year. So, you know, it's an element of luck in timing and so on. But a lot of that is about talking to the people and finding those opportunities. But there's no absolutes about any of this, I'm afraid. No magic answers. But I think the 3-4 months is sensible. I wouldn't be worried about applying a little bit earlier than that and talking to the guys, at least getting a sense of how far that can go. An anonymous attendee, what can you expect from entry-level interview? Let's talk a bit about the interviews, and maybe talk a little bit. So let's talk about writers and account managers slightly separately, just briefly. So writers, account managers, can you compare and contrast? What's the interview process like, Julia?
Well, first of all, they will usually talk to you about your background and your interests and what you ultimately want to do. So from there, they will gauge whether you're more likely to be suited to writing or account handling, or a hybrid. So it's not uncommon for somebody to be in an interview for an account executive job to be told they'd be better suited to a writing job, or vice versa. So that, yes, they will. Generally, the first interview will be relatively informal, looking at your background, what you've done, where your interests are. They may ask you what research you did prior to your interview, what you know about them. And then they will, if you're looking to be a writer, there will be a test at some stage, not necessarily at the first interview. It might be something that you can do from home, it might be something that you go back and do under time circumstances. If you're an account handler, there's likely to be some sort of presentation, but that will be at the second stage.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. I think what I'm going to do now, I think we've covered a lot of ground there, and ended with quite a good question there about what's happening in the interview. What I'd like to suggest is we bring the formal part of this meeting to a close, if we may. For those of you who are online at the moment, please don't rush off unless you have to. I'd like to send up a little poll out to you, but also both Julia and I are very happy to carry on talking. So we've got a couple more questions. We can keep talking for a little bit and see how that goes. But just for the moment, what I'd like to do, it seems a natural point to close the formal part of this. So I'd like to say a huge thanks to Julia there, and a huge thanks to everyone listening. And please, as always, any feedback will be very much appreciated. So thank you very much, everybody. And just give me a moment to stop this.
Thank you.